land. It is so wonderful to see old friends and a few new friends that are here.
And some strangers.
Yeah, a couple strangers, yeah. So, one person we have lost along the way this year is Bruce Beyer. He passed away in April of this year. And I did want to take a couple of minutes to talk about Bruce and his passing. I met him in 1967. I remember him as a kind of a large guy with a lot of blonde hair. I think he was about 6'3", a big smile on his face, and an energetic personality. We worked together at the Buffalo Draft Counseling Center, where we tried to present options to the draft to kids that didn't have access to college. Bruce was a joy to work with. Of course, in the course of Bruce's life, the fact that he took sanctuary in the church and refused induction into the U.S. military was a very important part of his life. Also tonight we have Bill Berry is here. He took part in that sanctuary movement, and he will offer a few words about Bruce after me. Bill also got to become a member of a very prestigious newly formed club called the Buffalo Nine. There he is. One other person that is inextricably intertwined with Bruce Beyer is Bruce Klein. Bruce Klein was a young man who grew up in the town of Eden, came from farm country. He came from a little different experience because he did not have the college. Many of us have been exposed to college and had that opportunity. Bruce Klein came to, I think he looked around at what was happening at that time, and he came to the same conclusion as Bruce Beyer, and Bruce Klein also refused induction and took sanctuary in the Unitarian Church on Elmwood and West Ferry.
Mike, you might mention his brother Dave too, being in Vietnam.
Okay, I stand corrected. So these two men certainly made their mark on the history of Buffalo. They were both very committed people to the peace movement. There was, I remember as growing up, there were many types of controversies that people had, that there were fervent debates back and forth on, such as which cigarette has less tar and smoother draw, whether the clothes make the man or the man make the clothes, or whether Mickey Mantle or Roger Maris was the best baseball player.
Mickey Mantle!
As the 60s wore on, there were other discussions that came up that were more significant. Bruce Beyer and Bruce Klein, when they took sanctuary in the church, they precipitated a very public display of putting their kind of butts on the line and making a statement and bringing the war up front so people could see. So I just wanted to say, for both of them, Bruce Beyer and Bruce Klein, they risked their liberty, their careers, their reputations, and they did so courageously. They did not think twice about doing it, and for that I just wanted to say thank you to Bruce Beyer and Bruce Klein for your service to our country.
Nice. Hoorah.
We have that member of that very exclusive club, the Buffalo Nine, Bill Berry here.
Hey, Bill.
My old buddy Bruce Beyer died April 15th. Mike and I thought that some sort of tribute to him was necessary because Bruce did not want a memorial, and his family has respected those wishes. but we thought that the commitment that he showed and the way he put, as Mike put it, put his butt on the line for the cause of peace and justice was worth remarking upon just after his death. Bruce was lifelong committed to the struggle for peace and the struggle for justice. He, as Mike said, he threw his whole body and soul into this and never thought for a minute about his own personal fate or his own personal fortune or what might happen to him because of his actions. He inspired hundreds and thousands of other people to action that helped end a war, save lives, and change many other people's lives. I first met Bruce in June 1968 on the first day of the Allentown Art Festival. It was a Saturday. He was sitting behind a table in front of the old Mesmer Dairy Store, white stucco building just east of Elmwood Avenue on Allen Street, about where the town restaurant driveway is right now. And on the table was a sign that said Buffalo Draft Resistance Union. Bruce wore a huge, and I mean a big, Free Huey button, referring to Huey Newton of the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California. I walked up and I introduced myself to Bruce. This was the first time I had ever met him. And explained to him that I had turned in my draft card in opposition to and in a way to help stop the war in Vietnam on April 3rd in Boston. I was a student in Boston, I told him, and I was home for the summer to work at Bethlehem Steel to earn a little money. And Bruce then told me that he had turned his draft card in Washington, D.C. that previous November 1967. So right away, in his characteristic, enthusiastic, and all-in manner, Bruce said, "You got to come to the Buffalo Draft Resistance Union office this coming week." The office, he told me, was located in the Fenton Building on Ferry Street, right near Maine, where the Housing Opportunities Made Equal building now sits right across the street. And I showed up. The rest, for me and for many other people who were involved with Bruce in the Draft Resistance Union that summer, is history. I want to set the stage a little bit, and Mike, if you get your shepherd's crook out, I'd be happy, because I'm going to talk about the year here. Set the stage a little bit for 1968. In November 1967, Martin Luther King came to Buffalo and spoke at Kleinhand's Music Hall. That hall was half empty that day, and I'll tell you why. It's because the mainstream media at that time, including the Buffalo Courier Express, the Buffalo News, the New York Times, and most other media outlets, had condemned him as a radical and a communist. And that was because that same year, just prior to coming to Buffalo, he had come out against the war in Vietnam and made it clear that his struggle for civil rights was one with the anti-war movement, and that together the two movements would be much stronger. So he was condemned as a radical and a communist. That's why that place wasn't full that night. Of course, 5 months later, he'd be dead. Just after that, in January of 1968, the South Vietnamese Viet Cong, and the North Vietnamese launched the Tet Offensive. Now, ultimately, the Tet Offensive was unsuccessful. The U.S. military beat it back, and it didn't work militarily to accomplish the uprising that the North and the Viet Cong thought that it would. But it was a big propaganda victory. The U.S. military and the government were shocked at the extent of this coordinated, widespread attack across all of South Vietnam. The American public was shocked because Defense Secretary McNamara and other government officials had been telling them that the war was all but won, that would soon be over. Immediately after Tet, General Westmoreland asked for 200,000 more troops. This was a turning point in the opposition to the war in this country, and it had a major effect. This is the sort of thing we were involved in. On April 1st, President Johnson said he would not run for re-election. On April 3rd, Martin Luther King was in Memphis supporting striking sanitation workers, and he was assassinated by a white supremacist, James Earl Ray. While all this was happening, Bruce was in Buffalo organizing resistance against the draft and against the war. This is the way he contributed. This is the kind of year that it was. Now that summer, as a result of his turning in his draft card, he was inducted into the armed services. He refused induction when he was reclassified 1A delinquent and brought down for induction into the Army. That summer, a warrant issued for his arrest as we worked at the Buffalo Draft Resistance Union, and his parents and Bruce convinced the Unitarian Church elders to allow Bruce and the other resistor that Mike referred to, Bruce Klein, to take sanctuary in the church. The way that ended up was a big crowd developed around this of anti-war people, all kinds of Union people, Vietnam veterans, including Bruce Klein's brother Don, high school students, college students, street people, all kinds of working class young people from around Buffalo. There was a big crowd there that gathered every day beginning in mid-August. On August 19th, about 40 federal officers and Buffalo police, uniformed Buffalo police, showed up at the church in broad daylight and fought their way through the entranceway of the church where all these people were standing and went down and grabbed Bruce Beyer and Bruce Klein from the pulpit area where they were. Subsequent to that, Bruce Beyer and 7 others were charged with assaulting federal officers. The resulting trials, the 2 trials that happened after that, galvanized the anti-war movement and resulted in recruiting thousands of young people and others all over the city and Western New York into that movement. And in my opinion, Bruce's commitment and dedication to these sorts of actions, which he continued to engage in, was what made that movement so successful, and the way and got all those other people that would not otherwise have been involved, leading in the end, of course, to overwhelming opposition to the war, so much so that the government sought peace and the war had to end. That's the kind of thing that Bruce did, and it's so unfortunate that he's with us, that he's not with us, excuse me. He's with us in some senses. So I've already gone on too long, but let me say this. Bruce had his bail revoked after being arrested for and going through a trial and being convicted because he incited a riot at UB. So what he did was he left for Canada and Sweden and back to Canada again, and he was in exile for 7 years. Finally, in 1977, accompanied by scores of supporters, including many Vietnam vets, a former POW, former Attorney General Ramsey Clark, walked from Fort Erie over into Buffalo along the Peace Bridge, and Bruce turned himself in to federal authorities. He spent a short amount of time in jail, and that was it. So he had been facing years in jail, which is why he left. So Bruce settled in Buffalo. He and his wife Mary, for 30 years, or almost 30 years, lived above their woodworking shop on Clinton Street and Emsley Street on the east side of Buffalo. They had a daughter, Liz, who brought them 2 grandchildren, Emsley, who's now 4, and Bruce, we called him Bruce Jr., who was just born last November. Those are some other of his legacies. Now, I've had a tough couple of months since Bruce died. Everywhere I look, I see Bruce. I see something that or I hear something that reminds me of him, or that I want to talk to him about, and I'm on the phone and have to consciously keep myself from dialing that very familiar phone number. When I walk up or down the stairs in my house, I see Bruce. I feel Bruce, because he crafted and put together those stairs. When I walk by my now 32-year-old daughter's cradle, Bruce made it. When I give it a little rock, I see Bruce and my daughter. The porch swing on our back stoop, Bruce made. So he's all around me. I'm reminded him every day. Whenever I hear a John Prine song, I think of Bruce, because Bruce is the one who first introduced me to John Prine's music. So he's there for me all the time. So I think Bruce lives on in his creations, but even more than that, beyond those creations, he lives on in the people who he inspired and supported throughout the years, the many GI resistors and other people that he supported in the cause of peace and justice over the years. So he lives on, as far as I'm concerned, in those ways. So Mike, I'm done. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for listening.
All right, so back to drinking beer.